morning, friends. This is the lecture, sixth in our series, and this lecture is on the course that is known as MEG 13. It's a literature course, and it refers to the life on the margins, people who are not at the center of society, who are not very important. They are simple people, but they also create a literature of their own, and that is called the literature of the margins, and we are discussing that. And this particular topic we are going to take up today is called Dalit Canon Distinctive Features. Now, in the previous lecture, I explained the term canon, and now I apply this to the present situation, the situation in which we are given the job to select certain books and to encourage a special kind of writing. That also is important. You know, when the world has changed, when society changes, when civilization, requires to have new emphases in it, then, there is a task that is to be done by the writers. The writers, of course, sometimes ask the audience as to what they want to know and what their questions are. And when the audience tells the questions, then the writers, in their own mind, note it that perhaps this is the need of the hour. In that light, let me say that a new situation has emerged in India in the 1980s. That situation is that a large number of people in India are not satisfied with the policies that existed in India till 1980, and that, of course, constitutionally everybody was equal, but then enough attention to the problems of the ordinary masses were not given. And one of the categories of the ordinary masses was Dalits, the people who had been oppressed socially for a long time, particularly under the Indian caste system. And then, these lower castes, supposedly lower castes in society, they, started complaining about not getting importance, not getting, productive jobs, and not the kind of respect that they expected from people. So some people who had gone to the school, had taken the advantage of education, they started thinking of their own social group, and that social group finally emerged as an inspiring element in their minds, and so they started writing a new kind of literature. And this literature initially was not recognized. It was not seen as literature, but these people increased in number, and they started emphasizing the nature of their writing. And in order to draw attention, they also offered different interpretations to the existing writing, which was canonical. So anyway, in this lecture, I would share with you certain features of the Dalit writing, which has become somewhat canonical in the period starting from 1980. So I start with the first point. And I say under this point, I'm of course talking about the features, the characteristics, the qualities, and therefore I'll start by saying this particular thing in the beginning. What does Dalit canon look like? We know what is a canon. What is a canon? Canon is a standard, respected, established writing. That's a canon. But what is Dalit canon? What is so different about books, that focus upon the life of Dalits, and whether there can be category of Dalit writing, and can certain books written on Dalit life or written by people who are Dalits, can they win the same kind of respect? And should they get that kind of respect? Should they lay claim on respectability? This is the question that is at the center of this particular lecture. So what does Dalit canon look like? We will find out. If somebody asks me what is good about a Dalit book, then I'll find out the reasons why a particular book can be called good. And if it can be called good, then there is a feature in it which might take my attention, and therefore I say, okay, this is the quality that Dalit writing has, and because of this, it might later on be accorded the title of a canon. So first question is, what does Dalit canon look like? I have to find it out. I have to read books in order to understand how they are different from other books in the same category of literature that I have been reading for the last 20, 30 years. So this is the question. The second question, which is next to it, it comes out of it, and it increases the scope of the previous question. This is, how is Dalit canon distinct from the canon of those others exploited in society? Now I'm making distinction. There is a section called Dalit, which is exploited. There is another section of the poor. They might belong to the upper caste, they might belong to the middle rung caste, but they also are exploited. They also are at the receiving end of injustice in society. So how are Dalits different from other poor people? Poverty, in fact, cannot be generally kept in mind while discussing only one social group. So one social group may be a group of poor people, but there are other social groups also which have poverty. So how to find Dalit as separate from, as distinct from the other exploited sections in society? This is the question that emerges immediately after I raise the first one. Then I repeat this question further. What are the characteristics of this category of writing? Okay, you can generally say that this is what is good about this writing, but you have to identify certain characteristics. And those characteristics is, for instance, there have to be certain characters, certain situations, and those situations were off our attention earlier. We didn't bother to see them in our midst. Our own eyes may have been shut to the realities of the country in which we lived. Most of us live in the cities, for instance. If we live in the cities, we know about the big markets, we know about the available items there, we know about the kind of thing that is in fashion because we are in the cities. What about the rural areas? We don't know anything about it. Therefore, that way, our knowledge will be limited, and our knowledge may be limited regarding the writing that is called the Dalit writing. So, how do we find out whether something is about Dalits, something is about poor people, something is about the people in the villages, people in the small towns? What are the characteristics? What are the qualities? What are the features that are there in those other kinds of writing, so that I can then finally say, well, this is the writing of the city, and this is the writing of the small town, and third is the writing of the village. The second point in this regard, we say we are drawn to the autobiography as a carrier of Dalit response. I'm making a good point, a big point here. Dalit writing generally is autobiographical. You know about literature. In the last 100 years, we have read different books coming from different great writers. Tagore's name you might have heard, Premchand's name you might have heard, Mulk Raj Anand's name you might have heard. I'm talking of the Indian writers. R.K. Narayan's writing you might be familiar with. All those things. But those people write about society. Those people write about the poor in general. And generally, people don't write autobiographies. They write about others. Premchand never attempted his hand at an autobiography, nor did, for instance, Tagore. He would always talk about his neighborhood. He would always talk about the village in Bengal at that point of time. But he would not share his personal details with us. Tagore would not tell us very clearly how he grew up as a child. Of course, this theme of the child, Tagore might take up in some of his writings, but not saying, that it is his childhood, it is his father's opinion, it is his uncle's opinion, it is his, friend's opinion. He doesn't say this. He might be using all that matter in order to write a novel or write a poem, but then he would always hide behind those writings his own understanding of the personal life. But come to Dalit writing, and there what you are struck by is that writers are writing autobiographies. What is an autobiography? Somebody's life story. Somebody has been born in a corner of a village, and that person faced difficulties, wanted to go to school, but there was not enough to eat in the home, and nobody was able to help him at all. So he didn't go to the primary school, and when he was already 10 or so, then he was made to work on the fields, and there he was all the time at the mercy of the landlord who had appointed him, employed him, and gave him food and other things. So this person has gone through a life which was a life of illiteracy, a life of helplessness, a life where his entire happiness or unhappiness belonged to or generated by, was generated by the life that he was living under the eyes, under the stare, under the glare of a landlord, under the glare of a particular employer. So this person, and would he marry? Would he marry happily? Is this their choice for him, or would the neighbors would decide? Would the neighbors decide for him? Nobody knows. We don't know as to what happens, in the life of a Dalit in the early years of one's life, and therefore, when somebody who is born and brought up there, then that person can tell us about what he saw, and that is his autobiography. And what we see is, and this is where this discussion becomes important. He starts talking about himself, and it's very interesting to hear somebody's own story. That when you are moving around and somebody says, "Do you know what happened to my life?" I would stop and say, "What happened to your life?" And that person then starts narrating his personal experience. So that experience, if it gets the shape of words and those words are printed, then it's an autobiography. And one can say that this kind of an autobiography was not a part of literature for a very long time, but now people write autobiographies. So this is a feature of Dalit writing, and Dalit Canon can be made to base itself on the account of one's life. So in this regard, we are drawn to the autobiography as a carrier of Dalit response. And response is important. You are told certain things and then respond. Response is reply, and Dalit people reply to a question that is asked from them, and that is the response, and that response then is of a particular kind. Under this category, you might focus upon the perception of the Dalit subject. A new word in this lecture, subject. What does subject mean here? Subject doesn't mean the issue. Subject here means the person. So Dalit person, that is the subject. And there is a long discussion about it. I would not go into that in this lecture. But then the Dalit subject, the Dalit active person, a person who grew up in Dalit surroundings and moved around and he had some education, and he saw that a large number of anomalies were faced by him. So he is the Dalit subject, and he is telling us. The very fact that the person is telling us through words, he writes those words in his book, in his copybook, and then he gets them printed. So this is the Dalit subject telling us. And telling us what? About his perceptions, not about his ideas. You see, Dalit writing may not be as strong today as to give us ideas about life, but definitely perceptions can be there. Perception is what you saw, what you heard, what you came across. That is the perception, how you felt. So at least at the level of feelings, autobiography makes us literate, makes us knowledgeable about the conditions of Dalit life in India. So he has gone through the consciousness of being subject, bearing with, that is tolerating, social oppression and prejudice. So if somebody says, well, I was stopped in my progress by certain pressures that happened, and let me tell you what those pressures were, and they molded my personality, he says. My personality would have been different if I didn't have those pressures on me. You can always say that because you might, in the school where you studied, seen people of the upper caste, and they had a different kind of personality, and your personality could not flower in that particular manner, and therefore you can say, well, here the social tensions that I bore were important, and that made me a Dalit. You can say that. So that is the feature of your writing, that you are telling your response to the oppression and the prejudice that was in your life at that point of time. The consciousness forged in this manner, and this is an important point in the understanding of literature, that you have a consciousness. All of us are not conscious. You might have our eyes, and we might be responding to things as they keep changing in front of our eyes. But then consciousness here means that you are alert, that you know what is happening, that you know that something is against your wishes and something is for your wishes. You also know that the person to whom you are talking is not giving you a chance to be courageous in your understanding. There will be another person who might help you. So if your consciousness tells you about the sympathetic view of one and the unsympathetic view of others, then that consciousness is a kind of upgradation of your life. And that happens gradually in the case of Dalit subjects, the Dalit people that one is talking about. The consciousness forged in this manner gets registered, gets imprinted in the autobiography form quite vividly. So why do we read autobiography? We read it because it's authentic, because somebody says it happened to me and this person is actual. And if you want to test whether this person is wrong or right, you can always befriend him, go with him, move around with him in the particular streets and mohallas where this person lived. You match his perception with what you see in his mohalla, and then you can realize that, okay, this is very educating, I didn't know about it, but now I know that the person has written in his autobiography all that really happened. This cannot be done in the case of novels written by established writers in the last 40, 50 years, because when you move around, you will not be in touch with that kind of understanding which is there in the case of autobiography. You can't go to a mohalla and say this is there, because the novel uses the mohalla, the novel uses the locale, but only in a general way. In the case of autobiography, the details are actual. There is the actual name of a street, there is the actual name of a shop, there is the actual name of a person who was not able to give education to his children. So autobiography is that way a very important source of information about experiences of a specific kind in a society. Now, autobiography generally has to be written in prose. It has to be written in the form of a narrative. It is closer to a novel. The only difference is that in the novel you have a large number of characters and there is a central character. But the other characters also are getting a great deal of importance. And in the autobiography, the importance is always, at least at the level of the angle of the person who has written it. So you cannot separate the author from the account in the book. In the case of a novel, you can separate the author from the account in the book, because the writer can say, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about these people whom I picked up for writing, and therefore I'm using them in order to extend a view. A novel is different from autobiography in this sense, because in the autobiography you have an actual person. In the novel you have an imagined person. So that is and the second thing is that autobiography is written in prose. That gets autobiography close to the novel. What about the poetry form? It may also be partly influenced, I say, by the experience that the subject undergoes as a sufferer and actually as an interpreter. So there can be Dalit poem also. Apart from Dalit autobiography, there can be Dalit poem. That also will extend the scope of Dalit writing further, because there will be more emotion there. There will be more happiness or denial of happiness there. In the autobiography, your mind will be stuck to the happenings in the life of a Dalit, but in the case of the Dalit poem, your focus will be on the feelings of the person who is expressing himself or gets expressed through certain emotions as a human figure. So there is a difference, but then the effect of both of them is going to be the same, and therefore both of them will have that kind of identity of writing. Three different categories of Dalit writing might be noted, and this once again features of Dalit writing. This is our topic today. So what is the one kind of Dalit writing? The first is the kind of literature emerging when an individual author writes about the socially marginalized. It is possible, that writing can be about one's street. It can be about one's village. It can be about one part of the town. And if that town's description is given authentically and with a sense of understanding and sympathy for what goes on there, then it is one kind of a writing. So if there is a writing telling you about a particular corner in society, in a town where maybe it's a slum area, somebody goes to a slum area, A Dalit goes to a slum area or has lived in that slum area, he doesn't talk about his own life, he talks about the area. So that is one kind of writing. You can straight away say that this is not the story of Delhi Central township, it is about the margin somewhere. This is one kind of a writing. So when you know that Dalits live at some place and that place is evoked as of great interest, then that is one kind of writing. Second writing is that in which the writer is born and brought up in surroundings of the marginalized and has seen from his own eyes the social environment first hand. So this is important. Here, it goes very close to autobiography. The first was descriptive. The first was about the place where the Dalit subject lived. The second is about the experience of the Dalit writing, experience of the Dalit subject regarding the social environment. So it's slightly restricted because it's not descriptive. It is basically sharing with the reader as to what kind of society is there in which the Dalit subject remains. So there is a difference. The difference is that the first is the account and second is closer to the feelings that are generated by the place where the Dalit writer lives. The third is where the Dalit individual turned writer has gone through struggles involving clashes in community, thus gaining heightened awareness. Now this writing is not that way descriptive, this writing is provocative. You read it and then you know that there is a person who saw and who imagined, and after imagining who also became excited and started discussing things. There can be certain Dalit subjects with which become leaders. Think of Dalit leaders then. These leaders get a lot of support from their own community, and therefore they start talking in general terms about the conditions of the community to which they belong. At the same time, they also provoke other people to oppose them, because there can be clashes outside the Dalit community from the upper caste. There might also be clashes within the community. For instance, there is a young person in Dalit writing, in Dalit surrounding, and he is angry, and there is another person who is not angry at all. Maybe he is old, he is not young, and maybe it's a clash between the Dalit father and the Dalit son, and there can be a clash between the friend of the Dalit subject and the enemy of the Dalit subject. So when there is a kind of clash going on in the Dalit community all the time, then you have a kind of wisdom emerging at the end of it, because the clashes tell you how to go about making changes at the level of reality. So I think that's a higher kind of writing, because in it you are going into the clashes, and clash means that you have an opinion, you express it, and you see its influence on others, but then there is another opinion. So you listen to that person, and that person gives a totally different opinion on you. And what happens is that then a kind of intermingling of the ideas may be the result. Maybe sometimes you learn from the other person, or sometimes the other person learns from you. And this insistence on explanation, understanding, or making others understand, this is a very heightened kind of a thing. This is not simple. You are not reading a report, you are not reading an account, you are actually reading a drama in which people discuss and differ. And discussing and differing are different from just listening to a person and knowing his opinion. So I say that there are three kinds of writing: the writing about the place, then secondly where one's experiences are put at the center of the place, and the third is that clashes occur in the community, and those clashes are captured, and through those clashes the truth is revealed indirectly. So I say that these three things they become the features of Dalit writing, and you can understand with their help as to what actually happens to this particular section of society. Then you might consider the following quote to delve deeper into the issue. Now let's read this quote, and then we can discuss it briefly. The quote begins with this: Dalit literature has been irrevocably shaped and indeed produced by the critique of the very non-Dalit sphere it excoriates. So one I'm talking about the clashes that occur. So maybe Dalit literature is shaped not by its own self, but is shaped by the other character, the other segment which is fighting the discourse. So, for instance, there are people who support Dalit cause, but there are others who don't. And when the person who supports the cause, he goes and attacks the other things which are anti-Dalit, then a kind of clarity emerges. And this is being quoted here. So what should we do? I think in that case, the two writings, the writing of the upper caste and the writing of the lower caste, they can be put next to each other. And when the writing on the lower caste criticizes the upper caste, then the upper caste also comes into the picture. So there is a kind of fusion, not that the writer likes this fusion, the writer wants to take a position, but when you do the writing, when you read the writing, then you realize that perhaps the two sides can be seen, and in fact, because they are fighting, therefore both of them are shaping each other. It is slightly theoretical issue, and this will require further explanation, which can be held later on in these lectures, or you can yourself, while reading the writing in general, you can come across these questions where you are, as a writer of the lower caste, you are criticizing the upper caste people, and in that criticism you become aware of not only the upper caste but also yourself. So that way they also start shaping your consciousness. So this is a slightly difficult point, but I think you can go into this. These upper caste literary forms function as oppositional parameters. They become different from yours in dialectical fashion. The dialectical fashion is that you influence them and they influence you. Dalit literature should therefore be read as constructing an anti-genealogy. Genealogy, a kind of development that is different from yours. This involves reading Dalit literature against a canon of literary texts in English and Hindi to reveal the range of cultural refusals. So what you do is that you read some Dalit books, at the same time you read other books of the upper caste, and the other things are not there in Dalits, and vice versa. What is there in the upper caste writing is not there in Dalits, and you can see the gap. Then you examine the reasons of the gap, and then you see that part of the gap is because what was there in the case of the non-Dalit writing, that is what became important in your writing. So that way the shaping is done of your tastes by the tastes that are developed in the other section. Mark the canon in the quote above and see how an alternative paradigm is visible in the background. So when there is a clash, then in the clash you can see two parties clashing, and therefore one doesn't know which one is exactly right or wrong. In it is discussed Dalit literature as a branch of writing that opposes the existing literary mode. That creates the interesting part of it. It is an alternate literary possibility. So there are two possibilities. One is pro-Dalit, the other is pro-other people, and those possibilities then make a space for the writing which was not there earlier. Dalit literature as a category is not independent. Naturally, it's not independent because it's there that there is suppression. It is dependent on the literature sympathetic to the upper caste against which it finds itself posed. Therefore, you can see that because the society itself is posing this particular contradiction. So that contradiction, that opposition, that difference of opinion and difference of attitude, that is captured by the clashes that happen in society. The autobiography unravels a series of experiences caught in one frame. It enlightens the reader about the constraints that the subject works under and grows more and more knowledgeable to finally reach the reality, the point of sharp awareness. Finally, I say, Dalit writing might try in vain to reach the stature of a literary respect and canon, and it could actually become a votary of the canon it was to observe as opposite to it or was critical of it. That's how established canons operate. You see, established canons are the canons of great literature, supported by the upper caste. So by fighting them, you start writing like them. So they operate that kind of pressure on you. They appeal to the individual writers from a point of strength, since behind them stands the authority of a supposedly they appeal to the individual writers from a point of strength, since behind them stands the authority of a supposedly superior culture. So, if there is a superior culture and there is supposedly inferior culture, then the two are shown to clash, and you can see that the two are actually regulating each other. They are shaping each other, and that is the conscious part, that is the complex part, and that is actually a critical challenge to all of us. I conclude by saying that conscious constructions, conscious means that you actually planned that they should be shown this way for the audience, have this tendency to mix and combine the personal poetic voice and the confessional autobiographical self. So, both these writings, the opposed writings, they actually gradually come near each other, and a new kind of canon may be then formed. Identity torture and troubled history allow both the modes equally well. You can have actually clashes in the upper caste writing, which is quite close to clashes in the lower caste, supposedly lower caste writing. So, we come to the conclusion, you might say by way of conclusion, that with the help of an evolving canon, changing more and more and becoming different, the autobiographical mode took into its fold a number of established forms and molded them into effective portrayals of Dalit life. So, not that all is wrong in the supposedly upper caste writing, where the people are humanistic, and they would definitely treat the masses that are helpless, that are unemployed, that are poor with sympathy, and that with that the two kinds of writing, the two kinds of canons, they can come closer to each other, and can, by learning from each other, they can enrich their own inner content. I hope you have got this lecture, understood this lecture, and I am sure that when you think about it more and more, you will gain entry into this very complex area of literature, where a canon has been formed which was not there earlier. Thank you.